Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining me with our weekly Q&A from the Family Support Team at the St. Louis ARC. As some of you know, it is October, which means it's National Disability Employment Awareness Month. We're spending all month talking to different people about the state of employment for people with disabilities here in St. Louis and across the area, and learning about best practices. So I'm super excited to have our guest today, Leslie Quarles, who works with the state of Missouri on the Employment First initiatives for the state. I want you guys to know that Leslie's been a wonderful partner with the ARC over many years in a variety of different jobs that were really focused on employment. And she is going to talk to us about her current role and then go right into a presentation that she's going to share with us about the state of Missouri and supported employment. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Good afternoon, everyone. As she said, my name is Leslie Quarles, and I work on the Employment First Missouri initiative. I come from the provider world originally. I've worked with a variety of providers in the areas of employment services and community integration in the states of Florida and Missouri. And then I've also been a surveyor for an organization called CARF International, which is an international accreditation bureau that a lot of providers do pursue in terms of quality assurance. So I get really excited about stats and data, but I most get excited when we are seeing so many success stories in terms of opportunities being increased for individuals with disabilities. So I am going to turn my video off and share my screen. Okay, so first of all, I want to let you know what Employment First Missouri is. And that is an initiative of the Missouri Department of Mental Health, specifically the Division of Developmental Disabilities. And we strive to support community partners to expand their capacity to support individuals to be successful in obtaining and maintaining employment in the community in support of Missouri's Employment First policy. We believe that anyone who wishes to work can work. It's just a matter of determining the right job match and supports. So in terms of understanding employment services, some of the funding sources listed on the screen may be familiar to you. All individuals interested in competitive integrated employment, or CIE, in the community may pursue employment through a variety of the funding sources: Missouri Vocational Rehabilitation, Rehabilitation Services for the Blind, or RSB. And today I'm going to be focusing on Missouri DMH, which is the provider of waiver-funded employment services. Waiver-funded services provide support for every step of the path to employment. And as you can see from this graphic, benefits planning is the anchor. And beyond that, some services may overlap at times. Something that is unique about waiver-funded services is that some of those services can be provided at the same time. So what happens during career planning? Starting out with that, this is how we make a plan to reach our final destination, which is competitive integrated employment. We want to help you discover how your interests, hobbies, and passions might then relate to working in the community. We want to get to know you better, and you get to know yourself better. Your provider will work with you to make a plan for exploring one or several types of jobs based on your interests. And there are a lot of ways to explore careers. Maybe starting out watching a video or talking to someone who performs that kind of job. You might take a tour of a company or do an informational interview. Now, this is when your employer would introduce you to an employer where that kind of work is done. And then you get a chance to learn about that by touring, watching people work, and even asking questions. You typically end up learning a lot about that environment. You might learn things that you like and things that you don't like, and that's okay. That's all part of exploring, so there's no pressure to figure out everything on day one. A big part of career planning is also transportation planning. This could be piecing together more than one option. Maybe a grandparent or a family friend is available a couple of mornings a week to drop you off at work. And then public transportation or county transportation or another family member could be that other piece of your transportation. Sometimes it's not just about having one perfect option, but figuring out what is available on what days and times. And then that transportation availability is put together with your preferences for how many hours you would like to work per week. And then that's used to plan out your availability for work. Pre-vocational services are unique to waiver-funded employment services. And what I mean by that is that this is not a service that is currently available through Missouri Vocational Rehabilitation. So during pre-vocational services, you have the chance to work on universal soft skills that will be needed in any type of work setting. You can work with your provider one-on-one or as part of a small group. Some activities might happen at the provider's office, but a big part of this is going out to volunteer at local nonprofit organizations so that you can practice what you're learning in real time. This is a great way to learn about safety awareness, build up your stamina, and work on interpersonal skills. Pre-vocational services can be provided at the same time as career planning or job development. For example, you might be doing some pre-vocational services for an hour and then move on to a career planning activity in the same day. During job development, you are helped with every step of the job search process. This may include meeting employers, completing applications, and interviews. The provider will also help to negotiate what kind of interview will best showcase your skills. For an example, an interview could be you sitting and talking with an employer, but not all interviews are done that way. Maybe you could chat with the employer during a company tour, or even do a working interview where you get to physically try out the job task. And then whenever it looks like a specific employer might be a match, it's important to return to that transportation planning. Supported employment supports begin when you are offered the job. You will be helped with all of the new hire processes, such as filling out paperwork and completing training. Your job coach is there to support you while you are being trained on your job duties and also help the employer know how you learn best. Your job coach might be there 100% of the time at first, but the goal is to help you connect with your coworkers and develop natural supports, such as knowing who else you can go to with a question. Over time, your job coach might fade or change how they support you as you become more confident and independent. Benefits planning can happen at any point during employment services. Maybe you need some initial concerns answered before you even feel comfortable exploring the possibility of working in the community. Or maybe once you have a job, you have new questions, such as if you are considering an increase in the number of hours you work. A certified benefits specialist will be able to address all of your concerns in terms of how your benefits may be impacted by working, and also explain the work incentives that help to make sure you are maximizing how much money you can earn. There are some things to keep in mind. Not everyone will need every waiver-funded employment service or in the same way. For example, someone may not need pre-vocational services at all. Or maybe you have some terrific soft skills, but you do need to work on your stamina. So you may only use a small amount of pre-vocational services along with the other services like career planning or job development. Sometimes a person is offered a job while participating in a career planning activity. And when that happens, we might essentially skip the job development stage since you were already offered a job, and then we just move right into supported employment. The point is that the waiver funded services are very holistic and they're designed to be individualized to what you need. And finally, there is a myth out there that everyone must first go through Missouri Vocational Rehabilitation Services before accessing waiver funded services. That is not true. What is most important is that you are matched with the funder and services that will best meet your needs. So it's really important to talk with your support coordinator about your goals and what you need to be successful. If it sounds like you'd benefit from a service that is only offered under the waiver, then you and your support coordinator can talk about using those waiver funded services instead of VR. Or if you pursued VR services in the past and it just wasn't the right fit, perhaps waiver funded services will be. And also, VR and waiver funded services can work together. They can be braided to provide seamless transition between services. There is another myth that someone must choose between day services and employment services. That's not the case either. You can be in employment services while still attending day services. And even after getting a job in the community, you can still participate in day services if that's what best fits your needs. Again, it's just very important you talk with your support coordinator and your team about your goals and needs. Now, it is necessary to have Medicaid to then pursue eligibility for a waiver. And it's a waiver that funds many home and community-based insurance or based services. So Medicaid is not just insurance, it's way beyond that. Starting at age 18, individuals can apply for Medicaid using only their personal income and resources. So parents' income and resources should not be counted at that point. So if you are curious about working in the community, that's awesome. Start talking with your family, your teachers, friends, and support coordinator. The sooner the better. If you have a friend that works, ask them about their job. Start thinking about volunteer experience you may have had through your school, a scout troop, or church. Think about what you did and what you learned from those experiences. Write down your interests and places you might like to visit. Oh, and make a list of any assistive technology, such as apps that you've used at home or school, because some of these might end up helping you at work. And if it's been several years since you graduated, that's okay. Whether you have or have not worked before, it is great to explore community employment. There is a lot of helpful info on the DMH website. When visiting the site, there are lots of tabs with info for what services are available and how to access them. There's the Promoting Employment section, which provides more information on Employment First. And finally, there's a map of the regional offices so that you can contact the one nearest to where you live. My role and my coworkers' roles with Employment First is to support the organizations that provide waiver-funded employment services. So I'm really happy to see that so many individuals and families are considering learning about competitive integrated employment. This is just a really exciting time, and I know Sharon can attest that we just see more and more success stories every single day.
Fantastic. Thanks. That was a really great overview, not only of what you all provide, but just the entire array of employment services. I guess before I ask some of those questions that are more specific to that, can you tell us about what, like we say Missouri is an employment first state. What does that mean? How did it happen? And does that impact funding at the state level?
Employment First is a federal philosophy and initiative that came out several years ago. And Missouri jumped on board with that, which I'm proud to say as a Missourian. But also legislation was recently passed this summer that is going to make employment even more of a focus here in this state. Now, how that's going to exactly translate, we don't really know, but we do know that there's going to be even more training and support for those organizations that provide those employment services. There's going to be opportunities for education to employers. So for example, I do training with employers on inclusive hiring strategies. I talk with them about disclosure and starting team resource groups and DEI initiatives. And so we're just really excited to see how that plays out.
Cool. Well, you know what? Once we know how that new legislation is implemented, we might have to have you back to come and talk to us a little bit more
Sure thing.
about that. So when you talk about the making a decision between going through vocational rehabilitation, getting Medicaid waiver funded via vocational services, or doing both, what's the pros and cons? What are the differences between choosing a waiver funding option versus VR?
Well, sometimes it doesn't even have to be a choice, since I did just very briefly mention that those services can be braided together. And the whole reason for that is to prevent people from slipping through the cracks and really provide every single support that someone needs. So for example, if someone pursues VR services, they have an intake, they go through a discovery and exploration process, they come up with a great job goal, they pursue employment, they get hired, and they're having fantastic supports and inclusive culture and all those good things on the job. What we might find sometimes is that the VR level of support gets exhausted because it's time limited on how long that can be in place. And with waiver funded services, we can provide ongoing significant support on the job for the life of the job, as long as that person needs. And so what I like to tell folks is think of Medicaid and waiver funded services as a proactive view. So it's great to apply for Medicaid when you turn 18, because then you can go through the eligibility process of applying for a waiver, which funds a lot of home and community services, not just employment. I mean, it really can open up someone's world. And so it's not necessarily about saying, I want this or that. It's just really important to talk with one support coordinator and really figuring out what's going to be the right match. And because sometimes it's not one or the other, sometimes we put both together.
Sure, but that's a really good clarification that the waiver funding has a longer period of time that you can get on the job support with coaching. So
Sure.
That's a good distinction between the two of those. And I think that's something that'll be important to our families. I'm also wondering, if you could give us an example of how transportation planning and benefits planning are funded through the waiver. Is that through just navigation with your case manager or an employment provider, or do you all offer specific resources for that?
Sure. So I'm going to answer the thing that stuck out to me first, and you'll have to remind me of the second part.
Okay.
So benefits planning is actually an authorized paid service up to 15 hours of benefits planning service. So here in the greater St. Louis area, we're really lucky. We have a lot of initial benefits planning resources. But for folks that don't live in greater St. Louis, they may be at a disadvantage. They can't just call one of the contacts that we share. And so what benefits planning does is they actually make a referral to an agency that has a certified benefits specialist on staff. They request what's called a BPQY, and they go through with a fine-tooth comb looking at what benefits that person specifically receives. And sometimes they just need some initial questions addressed even before they're willing to jump into career planning. So that's another difference with benefits planning, is it can help a family make a decision of whether or not to even pursue exploration. And then we can jump back in later, because it's not a one and done, you only get one chance to do this service. So you could be working years later and decide to dig deep, look into a past plan, want more information on whatever, and then that service can be authorized again. It really fills in the gaps for folks that don't have resources like we do in St. Louis. Now,
Yeah,
what was
so
the other part of your
well,
question?
first, let me say, if you are interested in benefits information, you will find that we've got several videos about benefit planning that might be of assistance to you. And our navigation team can help you find a good benefits planner in this area. So having said that, the other piece was transportation,
Oh,
because that
sure.
is such a hard thing right now, especially in the St. Louis region. We have a big hiring gap for our more accessible transportation. How is that service delivered?
So we work with, well, my job in particular, I work with organizations to help families kind of make that transition of moving from transportation was provided every day when someone went to school. Maybe transportation was provided every day when they went to a day program or a sheltered work environment, those kinds of things. And so really work with the family on exploring what options those are. And as I said, it's kind of beyond even having a plan A and plan B. Sometimes it's really truly piecing multiple things together. I've seen situations where, we purposefully looked for an employer that has a carpool culture, you know, or we have done a job sharing situation where we presented two candidates to an employer and one had a vehicle and one didn't. So it's more than just let's go get you travel trained and figure out the bus route, because there's a lot of things to consider and families have concerns, and we certainly understand that.
Yeah, I'm working with somebody that's got two jobs, and with one of those jobs, he can either walk or bike or take a straight transportation route. The other job is farther away. He's not comfortable with doing the transfer. It's much more complicated to work out those pieces, but you're right. It's not one and done. It's continuing to kind of work through the different scenarios for what's
Well, and
happening.
as you know, we're lucky to have public transportation here, but we've seen instances where somebody works somewhere several years and had that perfect one bus, no transfer route, and then a route is changed. And so it's just really important for organizations to be ready to pivot and kind of jump back in that transportation planning whenever it's needed.
Yeah, and that is something as a state that we're trying to do a better job coordinating, which I really appreciate. Looks like we've got a question, so let me see what it is. Oh, it's a long one. All right, let me see if I can sort this out. It says, do you have suggestions on how to discuss employment options with someone you know has the ability to work but doesn't have the desire? He receives SS disability, which is somewhat surprising since he and his mom only refer to the issues he has with his feet, and he doesn't have role models or encouragement from his mom, who he lives with, to get a job because she also is unemployed. So if you've got somebody that maybe lacks some motivation, are there ways to encourage people to consider employment?
Well, part of that is, I mean, how many informed choice trainings have we gone to, Sharon? Probably about 100 or more. But I think part of that is really recognizing that what may look like a lack of interest could be related to a simple lack of knowledge and experience. It could be related to low confidence, could be related to difficulty communicating choice, mistrust, just fear of the unknown or lack of agency, or maybe a negative previous experience. I mean, sometimes there's a lot of history where someone was just flat out told work wasn't an option, or that very limited options were available. So I think it's important to build rapport with them, ask some probing questions, and try to figure out where that lack of desire, what that really is, what's behind that.
Yeah, I love that answer so much, because I think we forget how many traumas a person, and sometimes a person and their family, have gone through as they work through the system and systems navigation with a disability. So that's really a wonderful answer. I also remind people that a lot of times folks aren't working because they want a job, because they want to contribute to the world and come in to do something 9 to 5. People work because they want the the money, and money allows them to achieve other goals they have. So my comment on that would be, see if you can figure out what is exciting to that person, whether it's that they want to live on their own at some point, or maybe they just want to be able to, buy a video game. But sometimes I think people have to have the need to have income to make employment really worthwhile over some of those other things that make it less desirable: fear and anxiety and being concerned about failure. So cool.
Right.
What happens as far as communication with somebody with waivered services and the school system? Is there an age at which people tend to get connected through to employment services on the Department of Mental Health side of things? Or is it really, what level of connection do you have with schools, Leslie?
Pre-ETS is kind of the first connection with school, right? And so in
What does
terms
that
of,
stand for?
oh, you're going to have to help me. It's the
Pre-employment training
transition
services. Or is it
services.
transition? I don't know.
Yes. So those are individuals that are technically employees of Mizzou. They're branched out across the whole state. They have a presence in basically every school, state schools. They're increasing their presence in private schools as well. And so I believe they start working with youth as young as 14 and working on some of those pre-vocational skills and some of that interest inventory, those kinds of things. So they start referring typically to some summer work experiences, as soon as someone is going to be 16. For DMH services, the first step is to go through that approval process through regional center to actually access service coordination. And they will tell you you have to have Medicaid in order to actually access service coordination. So if somebody is not 18 yet, yes, that's going to be based on family income, but once they turn 18, they're not going to be looking at the family income. So depending on that family's kind of situation, you could be looking at after 18, but transition age certainly is a time for us to be thinking about employment. Absolutely.
Yeah, our previous question churned up a lot of stuff in the Q&A. So I'm going to comment on this one, and then I want to follow up on the follow-up I got. So
Okay.
the first question is about connecting the dots as to how employment can help you achieve your goals. And I'll just say that I have spent quite a bit of time working with 13 to 15-year-olds, and I think finding opportunities for that conversation, they get it. They understand that. If I ask them what they want their lives to look like after high school, they'll say, I want to live in a mansion. I want to be able to travel to Florida to the beach. I want to do this. And then that's the first part of the conversation. And then we'll say, okay, if you want this to be able to happen, what do you think are some of the things you would need to do? And they'll say, I need to make money. And that leads you into that conversation. Leslie, is there anything else you would say about that?
One thing I would say is the Charting the Life course website has the STAR method in terms of figuring out not just the pieces of the puzzle and the members of a team, but how to really problem solve and determine people's motivations. I mean, just to give you a really extreme example, is if someone's dream was to go to a Taylor Swift concert, well, how much is that going to cost? It could cost $300. It could cost $1,000. And so really figuring out, what does someone love to do? What is beyond what the family can pay for and what maybe they have left over from SSI to pay for. And then go through, if you had a job and you made $14 an hour, $14.50 an hour, just throwing out examples of wages, and you work this much in a week, this would give you this much money. What could you do with that much money? Look up
Yeah.
things online about how much things cost and
Yeah,
look
so
how much
Charting the
more
Life
exciting
course is
their
out
life's going to
there
be.
at lifecoursetools.com. If you're interested in that, there's a really great portfolio out there for career development. So look under Life Course Tools, life domains, and you'll find a bunch of stuff under daily life and employment.
I
So
can
the
I can tell you a funny anecdote, Sharon.
great.
I did have an employer reach out to me once, and he said, you told me to call you if I ever have a problem. I'm not sure this is a problem. I just want to let you know. And this was a manager of a movie theater. And one of the benefits was that I think they got 1 or 2 free movies a week. Well, this employee had started bringing a friend with them, treating their friend and spending money at the concession stand. And we all know how much that's cost. So the manager said, I just feel like he's spending his whole paycheck here. It's just making me feel guilty. I give him money, he turns around, spends it right back here. And so what we talked with him about was, that he has agency now. He has money in his pocket he didn't have before. He's widened his social network, and he has the independence and freedom to be able to do that. So that was one of the just funny calls I got from an employer, really caring employer.
Well, and sometimes it's pretty cool to say, hey, this is where I work. Let's go do this.
Yeah.
I think that is a really neat thing that not everybody has that chance. We're running out of time, but there was a follow-up question. This makes me want to talk about kind of new initiatives. So for the person that was not super motivated to work, fun fact, he used to do a lot of chores in the neighborhood, mowing lawns, snow shoveling, and so on and so forth. And that made me think about customized employment, having your own business, those kinds of things. Are those kinds of opportunities available through Employment First Missouri, through the umbrella of employment?
Right. With waiver funded services, we really strive the customized model of really discovering someone's personal profile and what is going to allow them to follow their passion. Maybe it's not necessarily about making $1 million. Maybe it's about following a really, really distinct and exciting, unique passion. So customized employment does that. Sometimes we do a job analysis with an employer and we figure out there are gaps. There are things that other employees have a hard time getting to or that they don't enjoy, and we can piece together a brand new opportunity that didn't exist before. And then we also see a lot of self-employment examples. So I did a presentation at a conference this summer. I sent some emails out to providers and support coordinators, and I said, could you send me some cool examples of self-employment? And people sent me so many things I couldn't put them all in. The presentation would have been 3 hours. So we just see so many cool examples of self-employment, whether it be a little bitty niche small business that's just really what the person wants to do, or something that has the potential to grow. Now with the internet, we don't have to look at just what's in our zip code or our own backyard. We can look way beyond that.
Thank you so much, Leslie. I want to give you the last few minutes. If there's anything else you want to share with the audience, this is the time to do that.
I would just encourage you to take some of those tips that I shared that are actually tips I learned from interviewing families and individuals of how early they started thinking about employment. So if you are the parent or the guardian of someone who's still a student, really look for those inclusive opportunities for them to volunteer, to participate in extracurricular activities, and start keeping track of all of that, because all of those things turn into transferable skills.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to continue our journey down the employment path next week with a little bit of a shift. So for those of you parents out there or caregivers, we're going to talk a little bit about how your role changes as your family member becomes an adult, moves into the work world, and how you can maybe step back from being their voice and their advocate and give them the chance to speak up and figure out how to manage some of that. So we'll talk about strategies to be more of an advisor next week. I hope you'll come back and join us. Thank you again, Leslie. It was really great to see you today.